Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biollywood. In this podcast series, we talk about biological threats and pop culture that they appear in. I'm JT O'Brien, Research Principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I'm here with the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Asha M. George. Today, we will be talking about the recently released film, Alien Romulus. The film was written and directed by Fede Alvarez and produced by Ridley Scott. The premise of this film is, while scavenging the deep ends of a derelict space station, a group of young space colonists come face to face with the most terrifying life form in the universe. And this film takes place in between the events of Alien from 1979 and Aliens from 1986. The cast features Kaylee Spaney as Rain, who is an orphan minor, and David Johnson as Andy, who's an android that's been reprogrammed by Rain's late father. And then a bunch of other cast members with, several different relationships amongst themselves. This is a spoiler alert for if you have not seen the film. We would highly recommend you do so before continuing the podcast, because this will contain spoilers for Alien Romulus, and it likely will also contain some spoilers for some of the other films in the Alien franchise. So this is your final warning, and from this point forward, we will discuss spoilers. So I think where I want to start with this movie, first of all, I think it was amazing and well done.
Cinematically, you mean? Or
cinematically, in general, I thought it was a very good theater experience, and I feel like it probably ranks third overall in my opinion of all the films in the franchise.
Okay.
One of the really interesting things related to biodefense that came up, and it was kind of a new addition to the lore of the Alien franchise, was that Weyland-Yutani, the corporation, is not only trying to use the xenomorphs to make biological weapons, but they're also trying to use them to make humans more durable for spaceflight.
So, but listen, let's talk about that, because I thought that was interesting too. But then I wondered, is that just something they're saying to people? I mean, it would be the use of that. It's a dual. Like, on the one hand, it's a dual use. If you just accept on face value that this is true, that on the one hand, it could be a biological weapon. On the other hand, it could be used to make human beings more hardy, more able to colonize and do space flight and all of that. That's one way to look at it. But the other could be that this is an example of mis and disinformation. In which, or even just marketing, it's good for you.
Yeah, it's good for you, and it might heal you.
It might heal you. It might strengthen you. It might do all kinds of things. And in fact, in the movie, and we'll talk about it later, I'm sure somebody believes that.
Right.
So I don't, just like, are we to believe after all of these movies and the way they have portrayed this particular company, that suddenly this is being done for the good of humanity? Should we believe it?
I don't know. I think it's...
And who says it, by the way? As a former intelligence officer, I'm going to say we rate, there are two scales.
Yeah.
We rate sources of information. Right? So like the one rating is like A through G, and I think the other one is like 1 through 7 or something. Right? So an A1 source is the best source. It's credible source, and the information is really good and probably provable or something.
Right.
Are we really saying that Rook is a credible source of information
when his prime directive is to protect Weyland-Yutani and the corporation?
And who's to say he can't lie? Is he a lie? There's no... Do we know that in this universe the androids are not allowed to lie?
I think that they can. Thinking back to some of the earlier films, because I think in like either the first or the second Alien film, they were going to try and freeze off one of the face huggers off of somebody, and the android was like, no, don't do that. It could damage the person further, when really the case was, we learned in this film, it is possible to do.
Yeah.
He just didn't want to hurt the face hugger.
The face hugger.
So he was whether it's dishonesty or outright lying, I think they definitely have that capability.
So I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think that's a really good point.
We don't know.
Because we can't take his word at face value.
Right.
Because he's unreliable.
And if you look at the manufacturing,
it does not look like
it doesn't look like anything to do with medicine. There are no clinical trials that we're aware of. The laboratory didn't look like what you would see if you were going to try this out on human beings.
Right. It looked like a biological weapons production facility.
Yeah, and all those little packets and pods and stuff. Now, it's possible that it could, again, they could have been doing both at the same time.
Right, trying to figure
that
out.
is a third option.
Because the
not so much figure it out. It would be like one option is we're producing and we want to create biological weapons. Another option is we're trying to strengthen humans and make them more capable of colonization. And a third would be we're trying to do both.
Right.
It's a company.
Yeah, they're trying to make money.
It's a dastardly company. Right. It could be that they're trying to do both at the same time. Serve a military purpose that wants a biological weapon, and at the same time go on this other side and see if you can take some of that DNA or whatever and make people more resistant.
Yeah, and make them able to survive in harsher conditions, because the xenomorph can. That was another thing that we learned. Apparently, the alien did not immediately die in the first film after being pushed out of the airlock.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think they could be aiming to achieve both ends for profit, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know if that station, the overall purpose was for medical or amelioration reasons. I think the way that it was portrayed and the way that it looked definitely looked like a biological weapons production.
Yeah, of course. Now we have bias going into it because we've seen all the other movies and we think that that's what it is. But that's how it looked to me. So I just wanted to throw that out there that is a possibility that Rook was lying to everybody. That Andy's original programming or subsequent programming might have been, for the good of humanity. So let's tell the other android something that makes it better.
Right. Exactly, yeah. And I think it's interesting, too, because, as you alluded to earlier, later on in the film, the character does believe that.
Yeah.
She had been captured by the xenomorph, who I think was trying to use her as an incubator. And she, they eventually find her, and she has these injuries. So I can't remember who it was that said to take the injection. I think it might have been Rook was take the injection, it might heal.
I don't know. I don't remember why she did it.
Somebody said take the injection.
The utter stupidity of just shooting yourself up with something.
With some random
and
substance.
It's so funny too because we're have you read the package insert? What does it say?
Even know what
Has it been FDA approved? And meanwhile, she's just blithely. No, I shouldn't say blithely. That's not fair. She was dying. It was a dire situation.
Right.
But. No way. After being chased around by this thing, I'm not
injecting any part of it into me.
Why would you do that?
No way. I'm not doing it. I'd rather die of whatever the other natural causes are than take that risk.
You have no idea what it's going to do. And she was pregnant on top of everything.
Yeah. Which I think everyone, once you realize there's a pregnant person in an alien film, they're going to do something with that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of expected. What was not expected was what she gave birth to. I think, which was the opposite.
Why wouldn't you think that was expected?
Because it was so different than anything we had seen before. So it might lend some credibility to the idea that they were trying to make a human hybrid. Because it does look kind of like an engineer a little bit.
Well, I don't think they were trying to make a hybrid. I think
it looks more humanoid than.
Right. Well, what Rook was saying was more like, let's create a superhuman.
Right.
Right. So you get to retain your humanness and you'll just be better, but you'll still look the same. This thing
was 8 feet tall.
Was 8 feet tall, part human, part xenomorph. I don't think that was the corporation's intention to
I don't think so.
That.
To create that. I don't think that was their intention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I wasn't that surprised because we've seen in other movies that this is what happens
when somebody
there's this combined genetic material thing, so if it's part dog, part xenomorph, it looks different, a particular way. I will say though that this was a better result
than they have ever.
than they've had before. And like remember the one with Ripley's DNA and the Queen's or something?
That was just so out there.
It's like terrible.
yeah, it was just so out there. And this one I thought was a little bit more believable.
Yes, I thought it was more believable. The other one that I'm complaining about, that's the one where the eyes are very human. She recognizes it as her
child.
Yes, because of these incredibly human eyes. But it's ridiculous, and we know it's ridiculous. We've seen that, when people are wearing animal costumes in movies.
Yeah.
And they forget to do something about their eyes, or this is before CGI.
Right.
It just looks, you can tell immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at least with this one, I did think the offspring came out looking, yes, humanoid, but not really human. Right? Yeah. The eyes were different. Everything was different. It's the only thing that was the same was it had a head, it had 2 arms and 2 legs and a torso.
Right. Yeah.
And it worked. Yeah. That was enough.
Yeah.
I thought that was enough.
I agree. I did think it was really interesting though that how it affects a embryo differently than a person necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was an interesting way that they kind of showed that.
Yeah.
Constantly exploring new ways that the xenomorph can look, I think, is really cool, rather than just sticking with the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. What did you think about the containment procedures or containment protocols that were in place on the station before they arrived and then after?
I thought the containment protocols,
everybody that was already there is dead. So they could not have been that good.
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
By the time these kids are going up there, things are running around and it didn't look very contained.
Yeah.
But in fairness, the xenomorph was there.
Right.
They had, as usual, lost control of the alien material, and so you had little alien things all over the place, wreaking havoc. I don't know how you can contain that. Yeah. I will say, though, that I think that the mistake that this corporation keeps making is that they keep underestimating the xenomorph, or they keep overestimating our ability to somehow control it.
Right.
So if you think that, I don't see how you're going to go in and design, even if you say in advance, like, okay, we're going to go get a xenomorph, we're going to design a BSL to be able to handle that and handle the genetic material. I don't think if you have that much bias that you're going to do it right.
Right.
You're just going to say, well, this is how it is. And I just think that I wonder, well, let me say it this way. I wonder how much of that happens now. How much of the laboratory accidents that occur right now are occurring because we think we know what we're doing. We think we understand these organisms. We think one is just like this other one, which is just like this other one, and we do those in BSL-3, so a BSL-3 must be, enough. I don't know, but I thought the containment was ridiculous. No, I mean, there was no. If you look at the entire ship, you could tell the entire ship is not even set up for it. Right. The whole, in my opinion, if you're going to go do this, the whole ship should become a containment place. The whole thing, absolutely the whole thing. And I think, like we see in some buildings, we just talked about this with indoor air quality. Right. There are some buildings where if something is released and it's detected, or even like with a bomb, oh hey, there's a bomb over here or whatever, they can shut down HVAC to that part of the building. They can close it off. They can lock it down. They can do all kinds of things. So I would have hoped that would have been the way it would have been for this ship. And maybe it was designed that way, but a xenomorph is so overwhelming.
Right.
It's going to overpower all of that. So that's what I thought. What did you think of the containment?
Yeah, so I thought similarly. I thought it was interesting that the overall research station was called the Relevance, and then you had Romulus and Remus. I was wondering if that was supposed to be part of the containment. So Romulus maybe has the lab work being done, and Remus is its own thing.
Well, I did wonder the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, they show Romulus. They show Remus a little bit, and then they show Romulus, right? I did wonder, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
What was happening over on Remus?
Yeah. Like, so was that the safe space?
But it's hard to say. Was Remus the side that was supposed to be doing stuff that was for the good of humanity, but Romulus was not, and Romulus was about the warfare piece?
It could be that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's interesting.
And I guess we're never going to find out because the ship gets destroyed in the end.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think we're going to get a follow-up to this movie in particular, just because of the way it's placed in the chronological order of things.
Yeah.
I do like how it gave some respect and some acknowledgement to Prometheus with the black goo.
Oh, yes.
Coming back.
Black goo, yes.
I thought that was cool because I did like those movies, giving kind of like an origin. So I think it tied everything together really well. In terms of other biodefense things that, kind of came up as issues in this, like there was somebody that was locked behind a door. I think it was Kay, the pregnant woman, was locked behind the door when the xenomorph was coming to get her, and the android didn't let her through.
Yeah.
Because the xenomorph was trying to lure the others into that area.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this before, like at what point do you lock it down and keep the person in there versus opening the door and letting them through?
Well, I think that it's easy for all of us to say, oh, I would never let that person through. But you do have this feeling like, well, maybe we can save that person and then we can close the door.
Right.
Why? What would be the difference?
Right.
Also, it's really a big part of our culture now. After Korea or the Korean War and the Vietnam War, our tactics changed quite a bit in terms of guerrilla warfare and special ops and that kind of thing. But after Vietnam, the United States military anyway adopted this approach, which is just we don't leave our people behind. We just don't do that.
Right.
We will not leave our people behind, even if they're dead. We're not leaving them behind. So, if that becomes so much part of your culture, you're not going to leave them behind. We can't leave them behind. This is just not something you can do. And I don't think you want to take that out of people. It's
you want to keep that. Yeah.
But I also think it does speak to the need for protocols.
Right.
Some of the movies we've seen that we may or may not be talking about for this podcast, but like there's one in particular that I remember in which a ship. A spaceship leaves Earth and it's going out to one of the moons of Jupiter. And on the way, something happens. And two guys have to go outside and fix whatever it is. And they wind up having to pull the cover off of some, mechanistic box. And one of the guys says, you have to be really careful because they're corrosive, like highly, highly corrosive, poisonous liquids, gases in there. And we have our spacesuits on, but, we have to be careful.
Right.
And the other guy is saying, yes, we have to be careful, but we have to take this risk because we have to save the ship or the people or something. And so they're just out there pulling. And then, of course, they pull and some of this liquid, this poisonous liquid, gets on the poor guy that said, hey, we need to be careful.
Yeah.
And at that point, they don't know what to do. The people inside the ship don't know what to do. People outside of the ship don't know what to do because he's covered in corrosive, poisoned material. And the captain of the ship says, can't let him in. There's no way to let him in because the stuff is just going to get everywhere. It's going to get into the air system. That we can't control it. There's no way to control it. We can't do anything. They think about all kinds of things. Well, maybe we could, for 1 second, if he got out of his suit and he'd be in space, but we could bring him in and somehow, perhaps resuscitate him, something. But they all decide that no, this is not. They can't do it. Right. And he just sort of floats off and dies, in space. I think that's a realistic scenario.
Yeah. But
the problem in this movie is you're not letting somebody float off into space.
You're leaving them.
They're still in the same place, right. And they're on the other side of the door.
Yeah. I think they could have. I'm trying to remember how far away the xenomorph was from her.
Well, it was far enough away. Don't you think it was far enough away that you did think, there's a chance?
Yeah, there's a chance. Yeah, they just have to be very quick. But
yeah, I don't know. I don't know what we would have done in the same scenario. But I do think that, look, this was not a professional crew.
These were kids. Yeah, they were trying.
These were kids who were trying to get a hold of something to rescue themselves and get somewhere else. And, all the motivations are all over the place.
Right.
Andy, the android, is, he's got that weird, strange programming, odd programming, or defective programming. Rook seems to be, who knows if he's squared away or if he's been contaminated. Right. His own programming has been contaminated. This is not a professional group. Maybe a professional group would have behaved differently, but I don't know. We see the same thing happen over and over again.
Right.
In Aliens, it's the Marines that are going, and they do the same thing. We got to save so-and-so and such and such. Ripley's the voice of reason, who's saying, no, we have to sacrifice these people. It's too late.
Right.
While simultaneously wanting to save Newt.
Yeah.
And others. So I think it's probably really realistic. These are teenagers.
Right.
And none of this is going the way they thought it would go.
Right.
And none of them thought to wonder, why is this spaceship derelict in the first place?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And I would also say for us, we have to ask the question, why did the corporation just leave it hanging up there?
Yeah, why just leave it?
Doesn't make sense. And it clearly had been sitting there for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Why? It doesn't sound like the corporation we know and hate, right? It doesn't sound like them. They should have been sending multiple teams up there.
Yeah. Because they would have lost contact with the station.
Yeah. Why did they leave it? So that I found to be a plot hole. That was a problem for me. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, why did they leave it?
That company is willing to pay $1 gazillion to send these multiple other missions out to go get this thing, to get this DNA, to get xenomorphs. But this one's basically the equivalent of next door.
Yeah.
They're not going back up there numerous times. Now, granted, we didn't see absolutely everything, so maybe they did, and everybody just kept dying.
Right.
It's hard to say.
But you would have thought that they would have tried to deorbit it or something, or maybe they were trying to come up with a plan because they didn't want to sacrifice the genetic material.
They've been sitting there for so long.
Yeah. What's the?
I think we don't know. There's no time frame given to when they got a hold of the xenomorph. Is there?
Yeah. Because Alien 1 takes place in 2122, and Romulus takes place in 2142, so 20 years after the events of Alien 1. So I guess we could assume it's been up there for 20 years.
Well, 20 years or 10 years or even 5 years, that's too long for this company
to just be like,
hey, we're just going to, we're sacrificing that.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't seem to make much sense. Where do you think this landed for you in terms of the other Alien films, both in terms of just your preference and how you think it addressed biodefense issues compared to the other?
I'm not sure that with the first one, it's the first one.
Yeah.
It has shock value. You have no idea what's going on. You don't know what the xenomorph thingy is. You don't know anything. So it gets its own, nothing else is going to be like that one because that's the first one.
Right.
So of course we like that one. Then Aliens I really liked because of truly because of the military aspect.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff in there that is entertaining from the military perspective, all the way down to like some of the lines they have and just the way they behave. Never mind the alien and everything else going on. It's just funny and fun as a military person to watch it. So I really like that. Beyond that, I guess I did find this one to be it was really entertaining. It was riveting. It was interesting. I did not feel the way I did when I saw Covenant.
Yeah.
I felt, with both Covenant and what was the one before it? Prometheus. The advantages of those for me were just these explanations.
Yeah, it's the explanations
of stuff.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the rest of it didn't land very well with me. And I was kind of annoyed with Fassbender's character. The android was just a little bit too much for me. So I guess I would call this, like you did, like at least amongst the top three from an entertainment perspective. From a biodefense perspective, I have to say, putting aside the ethics of whether we should be producing biological weapons or going after something to create biological weapons and dealing with the fact that these things are extremely hard to control, I just have always thought that this company would not be this stupid. Yeah. I understand the first one, they just sort of trip across these things, right? I understand with aliens, somebody feels, well, of course, this is before we know that there's an in-between movie, right? But at least when they first came out, I can understand somebody thinks, hey, I think we can get out there and we can control it or we can do something.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's just like, this is too much.
Yeah, they're not learning from
we can't
the mistakes. Yeah,
we can't control it. We can't keep it on. We can't keep doing this. If anything, we have to set up defenses.
Right.
And that, I will say it's interesting. That's not an argument that's given, and it should be an argument. Ridley, if you're listening, it should be an argument in one of these movies. We need to capture one so we can defend against it, so we can figure out how to defend against it.
Figure out how to make a ship where the acid won't cut through the hole.
Whatever it is, that at least, but of course it won't matter because the reason for doing it doesn't overcome the inability to actually control the xenomorph.
Control it to begin with.
But I just thought, from a biodefense perspective, I thought there were too many things in this movie that just kind of made me go, I don't know.
Yeah.
The containment thing didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me that you're going to go tow a xenomorph that you see flying around, floating around in space, and tow it back. And then even if you do that, why would you be surprised when it reanimates? That didn't make any sense to me.
Right.
I think there's too much stupidity going on the part of this company or the scientists that were involved.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me. This is a corporation. This isn't some tiny little, 501c3 somewhere on some planet.
It's a giant corporation.
This is a giant multi-planet, multi-galaxy corporation. Multi-universe, maybe. And this is what they keep doing over and over again?
Yeah, and they can't figure out anything else that's better.
No.
It's just weird.
It didn't sit well with me. I didn't like that. I thought the kids, I wouldn't expect them to know anything different.
Right.
So, okay.
I think they did good enough for the situation that they were in.
Yeah. I did one thing I really liked about this movie was Andy. Andy's
character was great.
I thought that was great. I thought the actors did a great job. And it also gave it's another way of making androids human. Mm-hmm. All the other movies do that too. It's almost creepy, right? How human they are. At least Ripley thinks it is. And you get this feeling that they have feelings. And of course, David, the android in Covenant and Prometheus, proves that.
Right.
he has feelings. He loved his father. He loved what's her face, played by Numi, Rapace.
Oh yeah.
So, and Andy, it was just interesting. He had feelings,
Yeah.
or at least his programming, do what's best for Rain.
Right.
It was enough to make it seem like he had feelings.
Right.
Close enough. I thought that was interesting, and I did think it was interesting that when he got, they put in the other program, the upgrade program or whatever.
That is directive change.
Not just his directive change, but his whole,
acting, demeanor.
Countenance, demeanor, ability to speak, the ability to reason and think, all of that changed too. We do see in humans there are some conditions that people have that cause them to lose brain function, adequate brain function. There are movies that have been done about this, and it is possible to give them things, certain medications that cause them to sort of come back to life.
Right.
But what they've found, at least thus far, is that those medications, they're not good for the person. They're going to wind up killing them or something like that happens. So they have to take them back off. And it's quite sad. But there is a human analog to what happens to Andy.
Yeah.
I did think it was really interesting. I'm surprised they put it in the movie, but I was glad. I thought it was really interesting when he says to Rain, "No, I don't want you to take the program out because you've been having to take care of me all this time, and now I can be squared away. Now you don't have to do that. Now I can take care of you." I can understand that. People are like that all the time. They don't want to let go of the thing that they thought was so helpful, even if it has this negative side effect.
Yeah.
But I think a question for you about Andy is that a good example, any of these androids, a good example of AI bio?
Yeah, I think it really is, because it and this is something I think Ridley has kind of woven into a lot of his works, is the AI and the bio concept. So you have these androids that definitely do seem to exhibit human emotion and feelings and things like that. And when they end up dying, there's that milky substance. So assuming there's an organic component to them, they're not. I don't think they're just mechanical. I think they're also biological in some way. So I think he definitely is trying to convey that. And there's another series that Ridley had come up with called Raised by Wolves, which I think is kind of where the Romulus and Remus is a nod to that series, because Romulus and Remus were supposedly raised by wolves in Roman mythology. In this show, there are two androids. Their names are Mother and Father, and they have these children with them because something on Earth happened. So they bring children with them to a new planet, and they raise them, but they're androids. And as they're raising these children, they start to become more and more human, more and more protective of them. And then there are also biological things that are happening on this planet. So it's a theme that I think he consistently looks at and is interested in, which is really interesting considering how old the first Alien film is. I think it's something that's always been in the back of his mind, is this interaction between AI and bio, especially in the future, because there could be these things that you wouldn't even predict, like an android wanting to develop a biological weapon. An android sacrificing, or an AI sacrificing human life for the good of profit for a company. So I think it is really interesting.
Well, there's a question then for me about what kind of security measures we can put in to prevent
AI
some of these things from happening. Can you just simply changing an android's programming could make things worse,
right?
Of course, on the other hand, if you could just take the program out, that seems to be helpful. But I think that aside, it's also interesting to me to think about who Ridley Scott really considers to be the alien. Who is the alien? Who are the aliens? And what counts as an alien? I think in these movies, for me, what I always think is, well, the only thing that's really alien is the xenomorph. All off on it. It is completely and totally alien. It is not. It's not like that founding species.
Right.
It's not like us. And these androids, if you were to categorize them, you're not going to put them in the category with the alien.
Right.
They, at least, these androids are demonstrating, even if you don't agree, they're demonstrating loyalty to the company. Some of them loyalty to the company. Some of them loyalty to their mates, their shipmates. David is demonstrating loyalty to his father and what his father wanted to do, and then to
kind of taking on his own mission,
to doing his own mission, and it's sort of losing his mind over all of it. That's nothing that we see amongst the xenomorphs.
Right.
So, if that is the case, then these conversations we're having about AI bio, I think, need to take some more things into consideration. One of the things I say, and you've heard me say it a lot, is we started with cyber bio maybe 5 years ago. Now we're up to AI bio. The question is, what is next? And what are we willing to do about that? I think we need to, it's not just about, policy, let's, have policy groups and sit around and write reports and, generate congressional legislation and executive orders out of the White House. It's also like, okay, what are we going to do when it gets to that point where we have androids that are behaving in a very human way?
Do they have rights?
Do they have rights? We see that in other movies. We talk about that a lot. Do they have rights? What constitutes humanity? When you think about Blade Runner, for example, this is a big thing. You, as an audience member, do not think, in the end of that movie, you do not think that it's right.
Right.
That we have Blade Runners running around killing androids. Right. It's not fair.
It's not fair.
And those androids are human-ish.
Right, ish. But they still have human qualities, and that's going to be, I think, the thing that we grapple with when AI if it gets to that point. Yeah. Or when it does eventually.
And if you, and in looking at this movie, Alien Romulus, the android has a big part to play in keeping the human safe.
Right.
In the end.
Right. If he wasn't there.
And even Rook recognizes he can only do so much. He still needs the humans to do some things.
Right.
To even fulfill his own mission. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's a side story, I know, for this franchise, but I think it's a pretty important one, a pretty big one.
I think so too. I wouldn't even know if I would consider it a side story. I think it is a main theme. I think, even like, what's the bigger threat here? Is it the xenomorph or is it the android that's sitting next to you?
Yeah.
I think that's the question. That's a question that he tries to raise.
Yeah, but I will say though that with our most recent report and the very first report we put out, both of them called the National Blueprint for Biodefense, we cover a lot of ground in both of those reports. But the second one even more than the very first one, because there's so much that constitutes biodefense or that you have to take into consideration.
Right.
It's not just, what is HHS doing? It's not just, what's happening with human disease. It's all kinds of stuff. What is DOD doing? What is the State Department doing? What does the intelligence community need to do? What does the FBI need to be able to attribute these biological events, especially the ones that are terrorism?
Right.
What is USDA doing? Should they be doing something more about HPAI or not? We have AI bio recommendations in this blueprint. But we also talk about the Biological Weapons Convention. I think it just speaks to the need to take this field, I think, much more seriously and with a much broader view than what ordinarily people think. I think there's been too much emphasis on this is what we're doing about the nuclear threat, and this is what we're doing about the chemical threat. Those two fit in much smaller boxes.
Right.
They're devastating, don't get me wrong, but, they're much smaller and much more narrow and much easier to get a handle on and control, even in the way of international law and statute here and stuff, but not bio. Bio is just so massive.
It's massive. It's integrated into everything else.
And this movie, I think, really demonstrates that you don't actually necessarily know what's going to come at you from the biological realm.
Yeah.
You don't know what mutations are really going to result in. You don't know where this stuff is coming from. And I will say, too, one of the things I like about these movies is it always reminds me of our approach to biodefense.
Yeah.
And the notion that something it's not just about us fearing contamination of other worlds when we go there. Right. It's also, what are we bringing back? And maybe in this case, why are we bringing it back? Right. And where are we bringing it back to? At least in this movie, for goodness sakes, at least the ship is out. The
lab is up
outside
space.
Somewhere, yeah. And clearly not near Earth. I don't know if that was necessarily Saturn, but it was a planet with rings.
Yeah.
And it was somewhere else. And, we don't know why this company didn't do more with it more frequently, but at least they left it up there. And they didn't say, oh, you know what we need to do? Let's just bring the whole thing down to this planet.
Yeah.
So,
I guess that was a good decision and seems like something that they've always done. But it comes back to our Asha Biodefense recommendations.
Yeah.
We need a lab on the moon or on Mars itself.
Mm-hmm.
Or, one in the international, we have something in the International Space Station at the moment. But once that gets decommissioned,
yeah,
we need to start thinking about,
We need to think about it now. And, I can't imagine. I cannot imagine that NASA is not thinking about it.
Because there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that want to develop drugs in space because there are certain properties that you can get within zero-G that you just can't get here.
Yeah. Well, and, I think it just makes sense. If you're bringing specimens back from other places, why not bring it to the moon? We've got it. It's sitting there. There's nothing.
It's sterile.
It's pretty easy to control. And we're going there. So I would imagine, although we haven't heard this to our listening audience, we haven't heard or seen anything about plans for a lab up there. But I think they should put a lab up there or near it so that everything isn't there. Because why? It doesn't all need to come back.
It's just an extra firewall or layer of containment.
Yeah. I'm just not entirely convinced that we can predict every possible outcome, every possible biological organism in the entire universe that we're going to bring back here. And if we can't predict it, then we can't
take the risk of.
Right. And we can't. How can we design? Again, we're back to your question about containment. How do you design containment for something that you don't even understand the properties of because you've never seen it before?
Right. You can't.
But I do think it speaks to the need. One of our recommendations is to authorize the Office of Planetary Protection.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a really important thing to do. It doesn't mean that NASA's not doing the right thing with that office, but I think it needs to be authorized as the extremely important office that it is. Right. I think it's just going to become more and more important as we continue on. And if you take the scenario that we see here with the Aliens movies, this company is gigantic.
Right.
And it apparently has more control over everything that's going on than the military, than whatever the NASA equivalent might be during those times. And it's not a good idea to just, that's another lesson from the movie. So you can't let companies
take everything over.
Right. And have everything about the bottom line.
Yeah.
So who's there to balance that out? I think, at least right now, for us in this country, it's NASA.
Right.
And I think we need to authorize that office to demonstrate that we believe it to be the important thing that it is, and really strengthen it. Something that's not authorized in legislation. There's plenty of stuff, JT, that's not authorized that the executive branch is doing, and they have the permission of Congress. It's not like they don't, and they have the permission of the White House because they put in the budget request for these things. But to me, there is a real difference between something that's been authorized and something that has not.
Right.
Because at any point in time, the thing that has not isn't necessarily going to get money from the budget or from appropriations or mandatory spending or whatever. And at any point in time, somebody can come in and just go, we're getting rid of that.
Getting rid of the office.
I don't like the instability that implies.
Right.
It shouldn't be. That should not be something that a political appointee can do. That they should not be able to just walk in and go, hey, okay, we're shutting this thing down.
Yeah.
And have Congress have nothing really much to say about it. But if Congress authorizes it, then at the least somebody has to go to Congress and say, Congress, we want to shut this down. And then Congress gets to decide whether it should happen. So I don't know. That's my pitch for that. I think it's important, and I think this movie demonstrates why we need it.
Why we need it, especially.
But it also means, I have to add, NASA's going to have to start thinking about this with Congress with regard to regulatory authority.
Right, when it comes to private space corporations.
Yeah, and there's too much, and also just like the geography, I guess geography isn't the right word, it's some other kind of ography, spaceography. This thing like, the FAA has regulatory authority from this point to this point, and then NASA has it from this point to this point, but NASA doesn't have it over private sector, equipment and planes or whatever, but the FAA does, but only to this point. Like, it's too confusing.
Yeah, it needs to be ironed out.
There's too much stuff that is already beginning to happen. I think that's just not. It's not under control, and so far it's not affecting human health, and it's not affecting, global peace or whatever. But we're seeing indications.
We're seeing ripples.
Stuff keeps happening. When they sent those human remains up to the moon, and then one of our Native American Indian tribes came back and said, hey, not okay to us in our religion. And then there was this big debate about this. The White House had to get involved. NASA had to say it didn't have authority. The FAA had to say, hey, beyond this point, it's like this is beyond the atmosphere. We do not have regulatory authority. And yet here we are. We're spreading organic material on the moon.
Right.
Nobody's addressing these things. I think we need to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and especially with commercial spaceflight. I mean, we're seeing some of the consequences of corporations getting involved now, I think, with the astronauts who are currently stuck on the International Space Station.
I do believe that the government could step in and say, you cannot leave these people up here forever. But my point is, the government can just say, whenever somebody else goes up there, SpaceX, we're going to pay you, bring these poor people back.
Yeah.
So, but that is a different set of laws, I would imagine, and a different approach to humanity. And there's only, you can't just endlessly be dumping people up on the space station. Right. They only have so many resources. 2 whole people. That's 2 whole people. That's food. That's oxygen. Air. That's a lot. They can't leave them up there indefinitely.
Right. Completely agree. All right. Do you want to get to the ratings?
Yeah. Let's get to the ratings.
Okay. So for relevance to commission recommendations, I gave it a 3.5.
Okay.
Because not only I think it addresses the Asha for biodefense, but also a little bit of the AI bio stuff that we were just talking about.
I think there's more than this, though. I think you're being too harsh because, look, I think it speaks to the need for clinical trials. We talk about the need, that's a research thing. I think it speaks to the need to do a material threat determination of the xenomorphs and then say, okay, BARDA or whatever the equivalent is, what are you going to generate in order to help these people defend against this thing?
Right.
So while they didn't do it, there is applicability to our recommendations in that you can see what happens when you don't do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think there's that. I think there's with the involvement of the military that we see, throughout these movies, that to me there's also an implication for intel.
Right.
So nobody's done a proper threat assessment, let alone the material threat determination. But the intelligence community has a role to play here, I think, And who cares that this is private sector stuff? The intelligence community collects on the private sector all the time,
Right.
Especially when it has to do with national, or in this case, global, galaxy-wide, security. So I think this would have to be a responsibility that goes under the National Intelligence Manager or Global Planetary Intelligence Officer. I think there are questions. How does the BWC apply in this case? They're bringing it back. Ripley was on Earth. I don't know where this planet was, but, right? So this can't be in keeping with the BWC.
Right, it can't be.
So there's that. I think there's a lot of applicability, but it is like sort of in the absence, because they're doing all the opposite of what we recommend.
But it does demonstrate well what happens if you don't take those recommendations.
So I think I was going to give it a 4.
Okay. I think a 4 is fair.
Okay.
Scientific accuracy. I gave it a 4 because I thought that, and this is mostly like the zero gravity scenes were really cool.
Okay.
And I also, when there was no sound in space, that was very well done, I think, versus a movie like Gravity where you can hear.
Yeah, there's too much, and there's too much going on in space.
There's too much sound in a vacuum of space. In this, in the vacuum, it is
space and movement and light, not particularly bending the way it probably should. Yeah. Okay.
But so I gave it a 4 because, like when she has to get out of the way of, some of the acid blood that's floating, and she used the gun to shoot out and lure herself away, which I thought was really cool. I think that would work.
Yeah, but what about the accuracy or lack thereof of the production facility and all of that? I don't know that if it's truly credible even to be saying we're going to take something from this xenomorph and somehow use it to make human beings hardier.
Yeah.
I don't know how accurate that would be.
We have tried it with other animals.
Yeah. I don't know. Are we doing that by taking genetic material from a completely dissimilar entity?
I do know that like crocodiles in particular have been explored because of their immune systems. Because their immune systems have evolved over hundreds of millions of years. And them and Komodo dragons, they bite each other, they don't get sick. If you get bitten by one of them, you're probably going to die. Yeah. Because of the amount of bacteria that they and pathogens and viruses that they harbor in their mouth. So there is, ongoing research trying to figure out and isolate some of those compounds that they have. So
all right, well then I'll defer to you on this one. Okay, let's give it a 4. Okay. Is that what you want to give?
Yeah.
A 4. Okay.
Scenario development, I gave it a 5.
Yeah, same here. I didn't have any problems with the scenario.
Entertainment value, gave it a 5.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Entertained.
Yeah. It wasn't quite so esoteric as the last 2 movies were.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I thought also, I know we address it in some of the other things, but I think it helps that all these movies are usually very stunning, except for maybe the very first one. They're stunning things to look at. But this one in particular, I thought, there was a lot about it. I think you said it. This is one of those movies that you could turn the sound off and just watch it. It's so amazing.
Yeah.
So I would give it a 5.
Okay, cool. Success of the imagination or creativity. I gave it a 5.
That is ridiculous.
You think it's because I gave it a 5 because we gave the previous Alien franchise a 5, and we previously reviewed the Alien franchise.
Yeah.
This one.
Okay, come on. Let's take these two. We have 2 things in here. One is imagination. The other is creativity.
Right.
Okay. So first of all, this is not at all imaginative. In that it's a group of people going to a ship where they find, or going to a place where they find a xenomorph. Yeah, and the xenomorph is, it's all the same stuff. There's even with the birth of the offspring, it looked different, but it is like it happens every single movie, something gets produced. So I'm not going to give it to them for that.
Okay.
I did think the twist about what's really happening. Are they trying to make humans hardier? Are they trying to create biological weapons? I thought that was interesting. I thought that was good. And I thought that, I did think Andy, that was a new twist on androids, because we usually think like, oh, androids are completely, it's totally squared away. Everything was amazing. But that's it. Yeah. So okay, I was going to give it a 3. So if you were going to give it a 5, let's make it a 4.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
A shock or surprise value. The only moments that I was shocked were when we saw the offspring. But the entire audience was like made a whoa sound. Like everybody was.
I thought that there were some jump shock moments in this movie. I can't tell you which ones they were, but
there was one jump shock moment, I think, for me. I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah. So there was some stuff that was shocking. And I thought that one character, Kay, shooting herself with that stuff was shockingly stupid. But I mean that in like a positive way. Like when I saw that, I wanted to scream, like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
You cannot be doing this. And I have to say, I was surprised when Rook shows up and he changes Andy's prime directive.
Yeah.
That was a surprise to me.
It was.
But it wasn't full of shocks and surprises.
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
I gave it a 4.
Okay. I'm okay with a 4.
Okay. Government policy, I gave it a 1. Why do you think we should give it a 0?
Well, I think we shouldn't, I would say a 1, 2, because, well, I don't know, because what I was going to say is they left the ship up and didn't bring it down to the planet, but that wasn't a government. Well, we don't know if it's a government decision.
Yeah, we don't know how.
This company is a contracting company.
Right.
So, which implies that the government is paying them.
Right.
But I did think that was good. They did leave it and not bring it back somewhere when they could have. But I do think that the government policy that we see on the planet is outrageous. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Telling people that they can work and then if you work X amount of time, then you get to leave, and then they don't allow it. Yeah. That's truly, truly awful. But we don't. Other than that, we don't really see the government in this movie. I say, I agree. Let's give it a 1. Not so much a 0, because it is possible that it was the government itself that said, leave the ship up there.
Leave the ship up there. Okay. Sounds good. Portrayal by actors. I would say either a 4 or a 5. I don't think there was no acting that I thought was bad. Some people didn't like the AI recreation.
Well, I
didn't think it looked that bad.
I didn't think it looked bad either. I think they probably had a problem with it because they just reviewed the entire franchise and saw Ian Holm before, which isn't fair. I think, what I thought was there were some characters that I thought were over the top. But at the same time, they're teenagers.
Yeah.
And maybe they were told to behave that way. So you gave them a 5?
I was thinking a 4 or a 5.
I say let's give it a 4 because I think some of the actors were down at a 3 and others were up at a 5. Exactly. And I'm not saying it was necessarily the actor's fault. Somebody, the director or somebody could have told them to act this particular way.
Right.
But so let's call it.
That's what I feel. Yeah. Okay. 4.
Okay.
Direction.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it was a 5.
What would be bad about this?
Yeah, I think it was great.
Especially that scene where they're getting closer and closer to the rings.
Oh my gosh,
I mean, how much more realistic could that have been? That was amazing.
It was just amazing. And I think this leads into production, which I also would give a 5, just because it was beautiful.
I saw nothing
movie.
bad.
Yeah, everything looked real. Some people had issues with the CGI, but I didn't notice anything because it was a mix of practical and CGI.
I didn't notice it.
But I didn't notice it either. I would give it a 5.
Yeah. I think let's give it a 5.
Okay. So our overall score is 4.1.
Okay.
Which is pretty good.
I think it's pretty good. I think it's excellent. But I suspect that our ratings, I think all of our movies are coming in around the same score.
Yeah.
We might have to get more stringent.
Yeah,
with our ratings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode of the Biollywood podcast, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, and I think we should remember that in space, no one can hear you scream. And that no one can hear you.
Yeah.
All right. It's a ridiculous ending, but okay.
It works.